When people think of the Thousand-Year Door, some people may think of the battle system, some people may think of the story. For me personally though, I think of the chapters. And it makes sense because my first ever video on the Thousand-Year Door, when I am not kidding, I had 50 subscribers, I talked about the chapters. And I ranked them all. But that was a very old video, and my opinion has changed a decent amount. So I decided it's a great idea to redo this video. It's been a long time as well, so it just makes sense to do so. There is obviously a couple of ground rules though. I'm trying not to talk about bosses on this list. I'm going to try to save that for a boss ranking once I eventually do that again. But other than that, I mean, it is of course my opinion, but that's it. Let's just get started on this video. But before we get started, make sure to leave a like on the video. I'd really appreciate it. And also make sure to subscribe because I am premiering this video right now. So if you want to not miss the premiere, please subscribe so you can get notified of it. But other than that, let's actually get started on this video. I cannot believe that I somehow kind of predicted that this was gonna happen. Chapter 6, which was already pretty low on the list originally, it was at number 6, dropped even further than it already was. I did not expect it to go all the way to the bottom, but that's just how I feel about it. This chapter, in my personal opinion, has the biggest problems, but that doesn't really mean I hate it. I don't really even dislike this chapter. I don't mind going through it. It's not like a game like Sticker Star where there is genuine stuff I hate. Chapter 6 is just kinda lackluster. I just feel kinda meh about it. And I know I'm gonna have to explain my point a lot because this is a very popular chapter, but let's just get right into this. So chapter 6 is very popular because of the detective elements, the chill vibe that this place has, the midway station, the boss, Poshley Heights, and a lot of this stuff I do agree with, especially the chill vibe that this place has. It doesn't even feel like you're at a chapter. It may lower the stakes a little bit because you're not really on a quote-unquote adventure, but it kind of feels like a needed break. You're just on a train and you're talking to people. That's it. That's all this chapter really is until you get to the midway station. And then there's the detective stuff, which I'll talk about a little bit later. The midway station, once you get to that, it's solid. I mean, there's no enemy fights before this, so at the very least they introduced that stuff into it, which is kind of nice, because no enemy fights would be kind of bare bones. And that also leads into the boss fight, the Smorg, which is pretty good. It's one of my favorites from this game. It's actually kind of difficult, which is nice, and it attacks multiple times. Also, most of the passengers are inside the Smorg, which is kind of threatening. And also, it may not seem like a super obvious boss, because you get all the way to the bottom of the midway station, and then the Smorgs are just randomly down there. You don't really know that they're going to be the boss yet, but they're just randomly there. There's a huge horde of them. So in that regard, it's good. It's good foreshadowing. Also, you get an ability in this place, which is pretty nice. I like using the ability. It's the high jump. It's a very simple ability that's very fun to use. You can use it to climb poles on the ceiling. Now, if I'm talking so positively about this chapter, why is it at the bottom of the list? It all has to do with the detective stuff. People love the detective stuff because it's trying to solve a mystery. Solving mysteries are fun, and I absolutely agree with that. Trying to go from nothing, using tiny little leads that you wouldn't really expect to try to find, I don't know, in this case, just a kidnapper or a thief, is pretty cool. But in this case, if you already know who the thief is and what the leads are, then the mystery element is gone. And this was really shown in my second playthrough of the Thousand-Year Door, where I knew exactly what I needed to do, and then the chapter just kind of became boring. And it wasn't terrible, it wasn't long if you knew what you were doing, but it just wasn't that great of an experience, especially compared to the first playthrough. But on my third playthrough, my recent playthrough of this chapter, my opinion went down even more, because I knew what I needed to do. For example, let's go with the little Bob-omb, whose birthday it is, and he wants the autograph from the conductor. You cannot just go straight to the conductor, even if you know that you need the autograph from him. You have to talk to different people before you can do that. And that's pretty irritating. It's like you're trying to get into a room, but you have a key that actually solves the lock. But, oh no, the key breaks, so you have to go all the way back to this blacksmith thing to fix the key, and then you go back, oh, the key broke again, you have to go back and forth. It's irritating. That's exactly what I did with the conductor until I realized I need to talk to different people until I talk to the conductor. Something like that is just irritating, and it happens multiple times throughout the chapter. I already know the killer, quote unquote, so there really isn't any suspense. And because I don't know the leads, I'm just frantically going across the train trying to find stuff, not really enjoying my time there. Is it super annoying where I actually hate the chapter? No. Like I said, I do like the chapter, and the chill vibe and the atmosphere and the music really does carry it. But the mystery element for me personally is gone, and it's been gone since my original video, and that's why it's so low on the list. I was actually very excited to go through Chapter 8 again, because it didn't really have that much of an opinion of Chapter 8 to begin with, but now that I finally went through the chapter, well, now that you know that it's at the bottom of the list, basically, I mean, it was actually going to be at the very bottom, but it just felt wrong to put the last chapter in the game at the bottom of the list. I mean, it just showed that I really didn't care about this chapter. I will say, though, of course, the Grotus fight onward. The Grotus fight, Bowser and Cammy, and the Shadow Queen, and all the story stuff is great. I really like that portion of the game. Overall, like, not even just in Chapter 8, just overall in the game, it's a great portion. I love that very end of this game. The problem, though, is that it's only that part of the chapter. The rest of the chapter is just kind of bare bones at best. I mean, of course, there's a little bit of stuff in there. There's stuff like the Beldum fight, which is fine. There's the Constellation Room, which I'll talk about. And there's other bosses that I kind of forgot about because this chapter is not all that memorable, which I played this game a month ago. If it's unmemorable now, that's not a good thing. That really shows that I just don't care about this place and nothing really stood out. Except for one thing, and that's the Constellation Room. The Constellation Room is an awesome place. I do admit that I was very out of nowhere. I mean, I guess the entrance was a little bit more grand compared to others, but most of the entrances in this place are pretty grand, so it was very confusing to see this place out of nowhere. Also, the output of this place is literally just a key, unless I remember wrong, but also, again, it shows this chapter is not very memorable. But the rooms itself, it's very cool. It's just a ton of puzzles that you have to go through and get each individual stone thing. That's pretty cool in my opinion. It's very simple, there's no enemy fights, and it just works as a room. It's very chill and it's very atmospheric as well. I really like the music. It reminds me a lot of World 4 and the Parallel Worlds from Color Splash. Very transcendent, and it works really well in this case. The problem is that everything else is very lackluster. If you compare it to a chapter like Chapter 8 in Super Paper Mario, Castle Black has a ton of story stuff and very unique events going out through the entire chapter, and each level has something. The first level was showing you each individual level that Peach and Luigi went through. Chapter 2, you have Mimi stuff. Chapter 3, you have Dementio stuff. And of course, the last level, you're going to have Count Bleck and story stuff. Of course you are. But it's definitely more interesting that it's spread out through the entire chapter. Your interest is peaked the entire time. In Chapter 8 and the 1,000-Year Door, it's peaked at the very end. The journey to the very end is pretty boring to me personally, and that's why I don't care about this chapter. It feels like a very long Pirate's Grotto, comparing it to Chapter 5. Chapter 5, I think it's pretty good, you'll see obviously later on the list, but the Pirate's Grotto is one part of the chapter. It's the later part. The earlier part, you have stuff with Bombery, stuff with Flavio, just really interesting character moments, and even after that, you get to see stuff like Francesca, and with Cortez. Those stuff are very interesting. With Chapter 8, there's none of that, and it feels longer. That's a really big problem in my opinion. You're not learning anything new, you're not really going through anything interesting, it's just puzzles and enemy fights, and that leads into my biggest problem with this level. I do not like how many enemy fights there are in this place. Obviously the place is going to feel long because it's an extended Pirate's Grotto. The Pirate's Grotto already had a decent amount of enemies, but here It's just ridiculous. I feel like I went up over 5 to 6 levels. It's insane how many enemies are in this place. And I'm someone who kills every single enemy in sight for almost every single Mario RPG. If the one time in the 1,000-Year Door I don't want to kill enemies is in this place, it shows that the enemies are just obstacles and they're annoying me. If that happens, that shows that the chapter is not great. I really wish that the story elements or just more personality or more uniqueness was spread out through the chapter. The Beltum fight and the constellations are not enough. The puzzles are decent enough, but that's the only thing. Also, the music isn't all that memorable. Unmemorability, a ton of enemy fights. It just makes it lackluster at best, and that's why it's number 7 on the list. Up next on the list, we have the first chapter in the game, rightfully named Chapter 1. And, well, it's Chapter 1. But I do have to admit, this is probably one of the best Chapter 1 / World 1 / first areas in any of the Mario RPGs. And this is not because of Chapter 1 itself. Well, it kinda is, the quality-wise, it's because of Chapter 1. But the reason why it's so good in that regard is not because of Chapter 1 itself. It's because of the prologue. The prologue in the 1,000-Year Door is way more important than people really think. It has all the story stuff. It introduces battling, badges, how to use items, how to use special attacks. All that stuff. It teaches you an ability. It teaches you your partners. It teaches you all that before you even go into Chapter 1. Before you even go into Chapter 1, you've already fought a boss fight. So because of that, you're prepared to start the game, and Chapter 1 isn't holding you back too much, which is very appreciated. It's holding you back a little bit because Chapter 1 is still trying to introduce you to the game a little bit, but not pacing-wise. It just holds it back by simple concepts, which is why it's so low on the list for me personally. I mean, the first thing you have to do for this chapter is get a sun and a moonstone, which is fine. It's a fine concept. The way you get it is just going in this temple thing and fighting fuzzies for it. The golden fuzzy mini-boss is fine enough. It's the first mini-boss in the game, and it's kinda simple. It works for Chapter 1. Once you get that, you can access Hooktail's castle. But before that, you get to actually have Koops. Now, some people may not like his character. I don't either. Well, I don't dislike it, I just don't really care about it. But even though Koops' ability is really simple, my opinion on it has really bolstered. For some really strange reason that I don't even know why. I don't know, maybe the simplicity of the ability is kinda nice. I liked him in battle. He felt way stronger than Goombella. And I mean, his ability was so simple, it led to some good puzzles. I guess kinda holding his shell in place was kinda nice. It led to some more interesting puzzles than just hitting him. And that's it. So, I mean, it's simple, but it works in this case. Because again, Chapter 1 is simple, and that leads into Hooktail's castle. It's a castle, it has simple castle music, it has pretty simple enemies that are definitely more difficult than what you face in Petalburg, but it's still kinda simple. It has some good rooms though. The spike room was really nice. The ability that you learned in this place, kinda like the theme that I've been mentioning, very simple. You flip, and then you can go in between bars. You have to get the cricket badge, that's pretty important for the boss fight. But my favorite room in this place is not really a room in the castle. It's the outside. Right before the boss fight, you have to go through the outside and the music is gone except for air. And you're very small in this case, and I just like to build it to the first boss fight. It felt kinda unnecessary because of how easy the boss fight is, but for the first time you're going through it, it's kinda nice. And also, I like the boss fight. Hooktail was a good enough boss fight. The cricket badge was unique, the dialogue that you had with him, and he was difficult enough for the first chapter. The thing about Chapter 1 is that it's a really good introduction to the game. It shows you what 1,000-Year Door is going to be like. Everything that Chapter 1 does works. The problem is that since I've played the game so many times, the simple concepts here just don't work for me anymore. So because of that, it has to be lower on the list, but since it's one of the best Chapter 1s, I have to give it some credit there. Originally, Chapter 2 was my least favorite chapter. Not anymore. When I was playing through the game, I actually saw some merit to the chapter, and on my original list, the main reasons I disliked the chapter so much was controlling the punies and the layout. Those were the two things I really hated about the chapter. The layout, I'm kind of just used to. I mean, yes, it's a problem. The layout's really bad and confusing, especially for the second chapter in the game. It's really tall, but the rooms really don't look that different, which is very confusing for new players, but I know what they are. So, yes, it's a problem, but it doesn't affect me, so my opinion is just kind of nonchalant with it, so I don't really care that much. Now, controlling the punies. I mostly got over it. Controlling 10 is fine. I got very annoyed when I had to control 100. I compared it to playing Pikmin, which I don't really like doing still. So, yes, it is kind of annoying in only one room. The stupid bubble room. I hate it so much because you have to control 100 punies and send them to the other side with Flurry. The problem is that they don't line themselves up. The only way you can do it is really with the Punio Stone, or whatever it's called, and it just isn't amazing. It's the best way to line them up, but it isn't perfect. And it's not going to be perfect when there's 100 of them. And especially when you get to the time factor part of it, that gets really annoying because you're timed, and that's the longest part by far. It takes so much time just to blow them over. It's ridiculous, and I don't like it. But overall, I don't really mind it too much, because it's not like they really get lost that easy. Maybe they get lost like a couple of times, and yes, that halts you a little bit. That part's a little annoying, but I've gotten over it. The main problems I kind of have with this chapter now is really with the boss. The boss of the chapter is just so pathetic. Lord Crump is a fine character. He has some fine bosses in the game. He's really the first enemy you see in the game. And then in this chapter, the X-Nauts completely take over the Boggly Tree, which I actually thought was a pretty good concept, and you fight Lord Crump as the boss. Now, I guess it fits, but it felt so boring and generic. This is probably one of my least favorite chapter bosses in the game. It's very boring. He doesn't really have that many unique attacks. I thought the theme was just kind of It just didn't feel that unique, especially compared to Hooktail. That was a good first boss fight, and then you just compare it to Lord Crump in a mech suit. And that's also a problem I have with Chapter 7, but I'll talk about that a little later. But the main thing that really stands out for Chapter 2, and why I actually like the chapter a decent amount now, is the atmosphere and the music. This is the most beautiful place in Thousand Year Door. It's not even that close. The visuals and the music, the aesthetic is amazing. And I didn't really appreciate that before. But during this latest playthrough, it just overwhelmed me in that way. And overwhelmed in a good way. Just because of that, it really worked. I also thought Flurry was a pretty decent partner. Just like Koops, the simplicity is there, but I just liked using her ability. Now, yes, again, using her with the Punios wasn't great, but the rest of it was decent. I still like Koops more, but overall, she's fine. Now, why is this chapter number 5 when I'm not saying too much positive about it? Well, chapter 1, everything worked, but there's nothing that stood out. Chapter 8 and chapter 6 had stuff that stood out, but I honestly just found those chapters boring. Chapter 2, I don't find boring, and at the very least, has the atmosphere, music, and the decent concept of the X-Nauts taking over the Boggly Tree standing out for itself, and that's the main reason it's number 5. It can't get any higher because for Chapter 2 it's a fine concept, but it's still not amazing compared to other stuff in this game, so that's why it's still a little low on this list, but it's definitely an improvement over my original list. My opinion on Chapter 7 is so lopsided, and it's pretty obvious why, but it's kind of ridiculous how lopsided it is, and it's so lopsided, but it still landed at number 4 on the top half of the list. I like this chapter, but I don't love everything about it, and it's pretty obvious why. You start at the beginning of the chapter, you get into Far Outpost, you fight some enemies that are basically recycled from Chapter 2. Fine, they're more difficult, I don't care enough to really be bothered. What I do care about, though, is that you have to talk to the green Bob-omb, and to access the cannon to be shot into the moon, where the X-Naut base is, the good part of the chapter, of course, you have to get Gold Bob-omb and General White. Gold Bob-omb was fine. Maybe if you don't know exactly where he was, then it's a little annoying, but if you paid attention or just know like I did, you have to go back to Poshley Heights, and there we go. Pretty easy. General White, on the other hand, my gosh, it's the reason why people do not like this chapter, and understandably so. It ruined the chapter for me originally. Luckily, the X-Naut base saved it this time, but General White, you have to go through every single chapter again. You have to find a specific character from each one. Like, the first thing that I did is that I instantly went to Petalburg and talked to Mayor Shroob. I'm pretty sure that's how you started. I don't completely remember, but I just instantly thought that's probably the best thing to do. And then you get told, like, oh, they went to this place, then you have to talk to another person that runs it. The annoying part is that not all the areas actually have warp pipes. Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 5, and Chapter 6 does. Chapter 4 is fine because it's just a pipe and road port just like the other ones are. But Chapter 3, you have to take the blimp, and that takes a decent amount of time. And yes, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but I already don't want to do this. It's a wild goose chase for no reason. Especially because you're doing the wild goose chase, and the end result is just going right back to Far Outpost. It's so irritating. He's just in his bed, sleeping, and you have to wake him up after. Like, yes, it may be a little funny at first, but because of how annoying the wild goose chase actually is, it's not funny to me. It's just irritating. Now, luckily, once you wake him up, you get to the good part of the chapter. You start off by being on the moon, which I think was pretty atmospheric in a way, and I liked the enemies enough. It was kind of barren, but it's the moon. What do you expect? Then you get into the X-Naut base. Finally, the chapter is good. Great even. I really like the part of this game. It's just fun to go through. The music is really fun to jam through. The enemies are all X-Nauts, but they're different types of X-Nauts, which is nice, and they're all pretty difficult to fight. And most importantly, I really like going through each room that Peach had to go through for her side missions. I thought that was really cool. Now, obviously, not all the chapter is great. I think the layout's a little confusing, but it's not bad enough because it is also chapter 7. You kind of should expect that. And I just wish that the boss was Grodus himself. Why do we have to wait until chapter 8 to fight him? We got to fight Lord Crump again. Now, I said that I would talk about Lord Crump here, but I had the exact same problems as I did with him in chapter 2. I think he's kind of bland, and he's even more bland here. I mean, yes, he's more difficult. Of course he is. He better be. If he's not more difficult than the version in chapter 2, that's really sad. But it's basically the same boss fight, he just has new attacks, and that's just kind of boring in my opinion. I actually think the Lord Crump fight at the end of chapter 5 is my favorite, which is kind of sad compared to the other two boss fights that we talked about. I just wish that it was Grodus. It's not though, and that's kind of depressing. But every single room has really good puzzle elements and is really fun to explore. And because of that, it just makes the chapter really good in my opinion, or at least that part of the chapter. It's really depressing that the X-Naut base, the place that we were trying to get to this entire time, was taken down because of this terrible wild goose chase at the beginning of it. If that wasn't there, this would possibly be my favorite chapter in the entire game, or at the very least be in the top 3. But because of General White, has to be missing the podium. Chapter 5 and Chapter 7 were very close in the list. I basically had to pick the chapter that was very consistently good throughout, or the chapter that was really good at one part, but really garbage at another part. Now, if the part that was garbage was really just mediocre, then I would have went with Chapter 7. But because I really don't like General White, Chapter 5 takes the lead in this case. And Chapter 5, like I said, is just consistently good throughout. I really don't have any problems with this place. It just feels like an upgraded Chapter 1. More difficult enemies, a little bit of a better concept, better bosses, better ending. It's good. And let's talk about it. So you start off by crash landing on Keyhole Key, which is just a jungle island. That's really how I describe it. You have some good moments with Flavio and Bombery, but nothing too extreme. The really good stuff starts when you get into Pirate's Grotto. It's basically just Hooktail's castle, but better music in my opinion. I think the enemies are better, and I think there's better puzzles, mainly because you have more partners and more things that you could do to solve the problem. I also think Bombery is a little bit better partner than Koops, but I digress, that doesn't really matter that much. I like this place. It has some good puzzle rooms. You get to learn the boat ability here, which is a very simple ability, yes, and you move very slowly in the water, but I just like that you finally get the ability that you've been seeing throughout all of Rogueport that you just couldn't explore without it. Now you have it, and it really fits to get this ability here. It's literally a pirate's level, and you get to turn into a ship. It just makes sense. And they use the ability well here. You have to dodge waves, which you're in the water for. It makes sense, and I do like using it. Now, overall, that's really it. It's just a very simple chapter. Until you get to the Cortez fight. That's when I think the chapter gets really good. The Cortez fight, of course, is really good, has some good music, has good amount of good attacks. It's very solid. Then you get the Crystal Star. He thinks he's gonna steal all of his treasure, but no, just the one thing. And you think that's the end of the chapter. No, 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 no. Lord Crumb secretly gets onto your ship. Well, as a player, you obviously know, but he betrays you, and he sends a pirate ship of his own to try and attack you. So you have to go back to Cortez. This is where the highlight of the chapter really comes into play. You go in with Flavio, and he gives the Skull Gem to Cortez as a sign of forgiveness and as truce. And you tear out of the mountain with Cortez's ship, the boss that you just fought, and go against Lord Crump. That's also why I like this Lord Crump fight more than the other ones, and also I just think the fight is pretty solid. I like that the chapter just doesn't end at the Cortez fight. It's really weird that technically the part after the chapter ends is my favorite part, but I just really like it. It's a really good cinematic moment. Overall though, this is a very simple chapter. This, in my opinion, is the line, where if you're above this, you're a really good chapter. But this is just a very solid chapter that I like going through. I really like the mid-game of the Thousand Year Door, so this chapter was just a really good leadway into the end game, which obviously isn't as good, but the mid-game of this place is pretty solid, and that's why it's number 3. Chapter 4 stood the test of time for me personally. It was originally a number 2 on the list, and it stayed the exact same. It was very close quality-wise to Chapter 5 and Chapter 7, but I decided to put it at the top because it has those really high highs that Chapter 7 does, but it doesn't have those really low lows. It only has minimal lows that I will talk about, but it doesn't completely sink the chapter like it does for Chapter 7. The chapter really just stands alone with its atmosphere, music, and its story. The atmosphere and the music, it's obvious. This is a really dark place. I like the art style of this place. It just looks very sad and depressing. But obviously the music and the atmosphere pairs with that very well. Then you have the story, which is a very good mix of very goofy, but very genuinely terrifying. You have this curse that Dupless puts on the town, that every single time a bell rings, some of the NPCs get turned into pigs. That's very strange, but it's genuinely scary, and it works as a story, because you could get turned into a pig at any time. I don't want that to happen. I don't want to be a pig, so I'm going to stop Dupless right now. You have to go to the creepy steeple. It has some good platforming stuff. In between as well, it has some good stuff. It has some really tough enemies, which I'll talk about. Then you get to fight Dupless himself. Dupless is a fine fight. Both of his fights are okay enough. My opinion has really went downhill because I think the fights are really easy to deal with. The first fight, he has very little health, but he turns into you. And then the second one, you're just dealing with him again with the same amount of health, but you have your partners there. But your partners don't do any interesting attacks, and, I mean, they don't really do anything interesting. It's just kind of disappointing. But, of course, the main appeal of this chapter is once you defeat Dupless the first time, he turns into you. They turn the Shadow V version of Mario into what you actually are, which is interesting. He convinces all your partners, all of them, that he is the real Mario, and they leave. You don't have any partners anymore. You haven't had partners since the beginning of the game, and it just feels odd. And then you have to go through the forest again. This is where the problems start to arise. You have no partners anymore, so the enemies start to get really difficult. And you start getting into the really annoying part of the chapter that everyone doesn't like. The backtracking. I get it. It's there, and since I don't really have anything else to talk about, I'll talk about this as the last part of this chapter. The backtracking exists. It 100% does. You start at the town, you go to the creepy steeple. Obviously, Dupless then leaves with your partners, and then you have to go back to the town. You rescue Vivian, which is a good partner. I just don't really care about her ability. And then you have to get the letter P to spell out Dupless's name, which is, of course, back at the creepy steeple. Then you have to go back to Dupless. He is at the town. You have to spell out his name. And then, of course, the one thing that he could have done to make the pain even worse. He goes back to the top of the creepy steeple. The backtracking, it's there. I acknowledge that. Personally, though, I don't mind the backtracking. The back and forth nature of this chapter, I don't personally mind. What I do mind about it, though, is the enemies and the way they respawn. In the 1,000-Year Door, enemies respawn very frequently, which is good for people that want to grind up levels, but it's not really that bad, normally. Who cares? The enemies respawn, just dodge them. Well, maybe you'll get into the occasional situation where you don't dodge an enemy. And when you get into that situation, normally you just flee, and it's not really that difficult. But in this case, you can flee, and maybe you'll get lucky, hopefully, but the enemies are really strong in this case, because they're trying to give you the illusion that you don't have partners, so you're weak. It works. The problem with this chapter is that it works really well. That's not a good thing because the enemy fights are really difficult to deal with even when you get Vivian as a partner. Obviously Vivian is a partner, thank God you actually have one, but she doesn't have any attacks that takes out every single enemy. Each enemy fight in this place has at least 4 in each battle. That's really difficult to deal with, and it's just kind of annoying. I don't like that personally. Even I defeat every single enemy once throughout. I have to. That's just my nature when I'm playing 1,000-Year Door. But when I'm going back and forth, there is no way in the world I'm defeating all these enemies. But that's the only problem I have with this chapter. The atmosphere, the story, the music, the battles, they all work. That's why it's so high on the list. It's very much carried by that other stuff that I talk about very positively, but the really interesting concept of Dupless taking your identity has to be the reason why this is so high on the list. Glitzville being at number 1 obviously means that Glitzville is very special to me. Doing the list, I was struggling what was going to be between number 2 and number 8, but I knew that Glitzville was going to be number 1. I have so little flaws with this chapter, even if any, and it's really good compared to something like 6-1 in Super Paper Mario. 6-1 did this concept very wrong. At the end of the day, both of these places are just battle gauntlets, at least on the forefront. But Super Paper Mario's take on it is really bad because it's just the battle gauntlet. The music and the atmosphere is the exact same, even though it is good. The enemies are the exact same, and it just gets monotonous. There's no story in between to really break anything up. With Glitzville's much different. Obviously, you have to fight your way to the top, just like Sammer's Kingdom, and it's only 20 battles compared to 100, but 6-1, it's still just 20 battles. Doesn't matter. For Glitzville, you're fighting your way to the top, but each battle has a condition, which makes battles a little bit more interesting. It adds a little bit of spice into it, so it's not just normal battles like the Pit of 100 Trials. And you have story elements that makes it much better. When you're in the minor league, you're just dealing with people like Bandy Andy and King K, which are just really good characters, as well as Grubba and Jolene at this point, just being very chill characters as well. Once you get to the major league, Obviously, you unlock Yoshi, which is the best partner in the game, especially for its ability. Being able to run fast is just amazing. But once you get to the Major League, you get notes from X. X is Jolene in disguise, and she's telling you to do stuff. This not only breaks up the battling, because once you've done 10 battles, obviously it's going to get boring in a way. So developers combated this by just doing less battles at a time with X. You get the super hammer. You have to go to the phone box. You have to go into the storage closet. You get to find out where the missing fighters are. And once you get into the champion room, you find out all the corrupted stuff that Grubba has been going through. And you fight the Grubba fight, which is good. I think it's a really intimidating fight by him constantly raising his stats. In general, though, Glitchville doesn't really have any flaws. Now, yes, it is one format. I get why people wouldn't really like this chapter just from that, because at the end of the day, the forefront of it is just fighting battles. And it's kind of surprising that Chapter 6 got very unreplayable to me compared to Glitchville, where I constantly went through it. Now, yes, the mystery aspect for Chapter 3 is not there. Obviously, it's not going to. But it's backed up by the good characters, which is always going to stick. Obviously, the battle scene's really good. And I like X at least breaking up the battles. So right when they're going to feel monotonous, they're not anymore. That's why Glitchville is a really good chapter. It breaks everything up into really good segments, and it means the pacing is perfect for a Paper Mario chapter. In my opinion, this is one of the best parts of any Paper Mario game. Thank you guys for watching this video. If you lasted this long, please subscribe. I really appreciate that. Also, make sure to leave a like. Also, I have a podcast called The Flatmates. I'll have that in the description right now and on the screen. Other than that, G-bye.